There is a gift no one can steal from you. Not because it's hidden, because it doesn't exist until you reach out and take it yourself. Almost 2,000 years ago, a group of priests left behind an invitation to dive into an invisible cup and rise up different. This cup never had an owner. While I was reading that passage, something happened in my body, a pressure in my chest, an image I never asked for. What does that cup actually hold? Why was it sent into the world instead of simply handed to you? Right now, your own heart is weighing 3 signals at once: fear, real intuition, and something else entirely, as if they were the same weight on the same scale. I call this the Ma at drift. And I'll show you exactly where that doubt comes from, because no one else, anywhere in the world, can step inside your own consciousness and make that dive for you.
There is a gift no one can steal from you, not because it's hidden away somewhere, because it simply doesn't exist until you reach out and take it yourself. Almost 2,000 years ago, a group of priests left behind a strange invitation meant for anyone willing to dive into a kind of invisible cup and come back up different. Few people know that invitation still stands. Fewer still know it might be aimed right now straight at you. If you believe a spiritual gift is just an accident of birth, something you either have or you don't, wait until you understand this cup never had an owner. Across the centuries, it only ever had 2 kinds of people, those willing and those who chose not to look. While I was reading that passage, paying more attention than usual, something happened in my body. It's the kind of thing you only understand afterward, examining it carefully, never in the moment it happens. What does that cup actually hold? Why was it sent out into the world instead of simply handed over? To understand that, we need to go back almost 2,000 years to a text almost no one has read, and to one night when I read too closely. There's a specific feeling you might already know well. The sense that there's a layer of perception other people seem to reach without effort, while for you, it stays shut, like a door that's stuck, one you stopped trying to open. It isn't quite envy. It's something quieter, a doubt that rarely turns into a full sentence. Maybe I'm just not the kind of person who feels these things. Maybe you're thinking this is just generic anxiety, the kind of discomfort that could attach itself to any subject at all. Maybe it is. But the reason this specific pattern keeps repeating in your life, always at the same moment, always the same way, has a concrete origin. That's the origin I'm going to show you, without rushing and without an easy promise. That doubt shows up when your intuition fails you in the middle of an important decision, and you only understand the mistake after it's already cost you something. It shows up when a room drains you for no clear reason, and you leave more tired than you arrived, unable to point to what exactly pulled the energy out of you. And it shows up, most of all, when you doubt yourself at the exact moment you needed to trust yourself most, arriving before you can even react to it. There's something curious about this pattern. It almost never shows up in the big, obvious moments, the ones you already expect. It shows up in the small ones, an ordinary conversation that leaves an unnamed discomfort behind, a simple decision that seemed clear until you actually walked into the room. And because it's small, no one stops to examine it. You just feel the accumulated weight without ever counting the stones one by one. I carried that same doubt myself for years before I understood it wasn't about capacity, it was about calibration, a scale that measured correctly, but that no one had ever taught me to adjust. And this entire video is about the difference between those 2 things, because confusing one for the other is exactly what keeps so many people stuck in a cycle that feels personal, but isn't. Before I show you where that doubt comes from, watch this. Most people caught in a cycle of anxiety, insecurity, or emotional exhaustion don't notice one simple thing. The ancient Egyptians already observed something similar, a moment when the inner compass stops reading true and no one can say exactly when it drifted. In the Book of the Dead, the heart was weighed against a single feather, the feather of truth. Not two feathers, not three, one. But right now, your own heart might be weighing three completely different signals at once: fear, real intuition, and sensations that could have an emotional, environmental, or even interconsciential origin, as if they were the same weight on the same side of the scale. I call this confusion the Mott drift, the moment when fear, intuition, and possible outside influences are perceived as if they were a single signal, indistinguishable from one another. I need to be clear, this isn't an ancient concept. It's a framework of my own, inspired by the Egyptian weighing of the heart, not lifted directly from it. It's one of the working hypotheses I use to understand why your inner signals feel contradictory, why you doubt decisions that were actually right, and why certain rooms drain you before you even understand why. This isn't a lack of intuition. It never was. It's a scale that hasn't been calibrated yet. Stay until the end of this video and then check the link in the description. What I'm about to show you is waiting there. Hold on to that name, the Mott drift. We'll come back to it. For now, I'm going back to the Egypt of almost 2,000 years ago, to the text that reminded me of this exact same question about calibration. The most common way people treat a 5,000-year-old Egyptian gift is as a synonym for clairvoyance, the third eye, the sleeping psychic ability just waiting to switch on. That level is real, and I'll deal with it honestly later in this video. I won't pretend it isn't part of the conversation. But that isn't where this subject actually operates, and I think you already suspect that. You just don't have the words for it yet. You might be skeptical right now. Another video promising a hidden gift, another promise that sounds nice and doesn't hold up. Fair enough. That's exactly why I'm going to show you the source itself, not just tell you about it. I went looking for the text that gives this gift its name, a Hermetic document from the 2nd or 3rd century, the Corpus Hermeticum. What I found never once mentions psychic power, not in a single line. It talks about something else, something stranger to accept at first, a transformation in the very way of knowing which the tradition called Nous. That doesn't mean the hypotheses of expanded perception is off the table. I'll come back to it honestly about what it is and what it isn't. It just means the level where most people treat this subject isn't the level where the original text actually places it, and that difference changes everything that follows. The tradition calls this image the Krater, the cup. In the 4th book of the Corpus Hermeticum, the text says the divine distributed the Logos, the word, among everyone equally, without exception. But the Nous wasn't distributed the same way. The Nous was sent into the world inside a cup, set apart, waiting. And the herald announced out loud for anyone willing to hear, whoever wanted to could dive into it and rise up whole. That's the concept behind this gift's name, and it's worth holding this image for a moment. It isn't a power that only a few people have, hidden in some and absent in others. It's an invitation extended to everyone without distinction that demands only one thing: the choice to dive in. Every time this video says the gift, that's what I mean, not a rare talent you either have or don't. A universal invitation that still depends on you. One thing needs to be clear about the 5,000 years in the title, because I'd rather be exact than sound impressive. The cult of Thoth, the Egyptian deity tied to this knowledge, has roots going back around 5,100 years. That part is real, genuinely ancient. Its oldest written record appears in the pyramid texts about 4,400 years ago, carved in stone to last. But the Corpus Hermeticum, the cup text I'm using here as the central source, was written in Alexandria around 1,800 years ago, considerably more recent than the cult that inspired it. It belongs to a Greco-Egyptian current tied to Hermes Thoth, a crossing of two traditions that met in the same city. The treatise itself isn't 5,000 years old, and I'd rather tell you that now, plainly, than have you find out later and feel misled. What I've documented so far is historical and verifiable. Anyone can check those dates. But what happened to me while I was reading that text isn't archival data, it isn't a footnote, it's an experience I carry. With all the limits of memory, an experience like that really has. One night, reading the 4th chapter more closely than usual, trying to truly understand the image of the cup, I registered a physical sensation I wasn't expecting, something like a light pressure, an attention pulled inward toward the chest, almost physical. And at some point close to that reading, a clear mental image arrived, a vessel, plain, without any ornament at all. I didn't record every detail at the time. I didn't have a notebook beside me, timing every second. I can't say for certain whether the image came during the reading or right after it, or whether the sensation continued after I closed the book. I'd rather admit that gap than invent a precision I don't actually have. My first reaction was to doubt myself, and I think that should be anyone's first reaction. I was reading about a cup, and I pictured a cup. That's the simplest explanation there is, and simple explanations are usually the correct ones. I went back to that chapter other times, on different nights, trying to reproduce the experience on purpose, and that by itself is already a meaningful piece of information. I could never recreate it the same way, with the same intensity. What happened that specific night never became a method. It stayed a single episode, and maybe that's exactly what makes it hard to dismiss. If it were simple suggestion, I'd expect to be able to repeat it on demand. I can't. But after that night, the Corpus Hermeticum stopped being, for me, an abstract concept sitting on a mental shelf. It became the description of a moment you feel in the body, not just think about in the head. There's a story the Hermetic tradition tells about this kind of experience, that it demands preparation, discipline, a progression that can't be rushed. It's worth translating that story into mechanism before simply accepting or rejecting it outright. In 1956, Franz Bardon presented a modern system of Hermetic training organized into 10 progressive steps, each one building on the last. He never wrote, in any text I could locate, that only a few people complete these steps. I won't attribute a line to him that he never said. That would be dishonest. But the 10-step structure itself already shows something on its own. Initial curiosity and sustained discipline over time are very different things, and most people stop at the first step. In the 1970s, researchers at the Stanford Research Institute studied reports of remote perception using protocols and controls. The Institute is an independent research organization, not to be confused with Stanford University itself, despite the similar name. Some of the results were even published in relevant journals at the time. The methodology remains controversial to this day, and I won't pretend otherwise. Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff proposed decades later a controversial model in which quantum processes would play a role in the formation of consciousness itself. That doesn't prove the nous, it doesn't demonstrate any clairvoyance. That's not what I'm saying. These three references don't say the same thing, and they don't validate one another. It would be dishonest to lump the three together as if they formed a single proof. Bardon speaks of practical discipline, step by step. The Stanford research investigates unusual perception with every methodological problem that carries. Penrose and Hameroff discuss possible physical mechanisms of consciousness on ground that's still speculative. I bring them together only because, each in its own field, they keep the question about the mind from being closed too early before its time. I reached a point where separating fact from interpretation stopped being an academic luxury and became a practical necessity. Not because the analysis failed somewhere, but because the question left over here doesn't get solved by analysis alone. The Corpus Hermeticum, as a documentary source, presents the nous through the image of the Krater, a call to take part in a higher condition of knowledge. The text never mentions clairvoyance, the third eye, or extrasensory perception, not once, in any line I've found. My own reading, and here I'm speaking as interpretation, never as fact of the text, is different. To me, this dive is a transformation in the way of perceiving, thinking, and being present, not the activation of some specific power switching on. I hold a spiritual hypothesis about this, and I state it exactly as a hypothesis, without disguising it. A broader clarity could also favor perceptions we normally ignore in daily life. And I have an analogy I use for myself. The cup represents a willingness to cross the habitual limits of your own perception, not a magic key that opens a door once and for all. 4 layers, stacked one on top of the other. Only one question is left standing at the end of them. Are you willing to dive in, even knowing the only guaranteed outcome might be yourself changed and not some power switching on? That question implicates me too, and I don't get to escape it just because I'm the one narrating this video. It's the question that made me return to that night of reading more than once, trying to understand what actually remained. Before I tell you what I think happened that night, it's worth holding one thing carefully. A physical sensation and a mental image on their own prove absolutely nothing. That doesn't invalidate the experience. It simply defines, honestly, what it can and can't support by itself. The possible explanations in the order I need to consider them without skipping any. First, direct mental association. I was reading about a cup and I pictured a cup, no mystery there. Second, a common psychophysiological response to concentrated reading, the kind of thing that happens to any absorbed reader. Third, the expectation the text itself created. I already knew before reading that the Krater was the central image of that chapter. Fourth, memory and imagination combining over time, gradually distorting what actually happened that night. Fifth, and only fifth, after exhausting the other 4, the hypothesis of parapsychic perception, a broad category of perception that doesn't depend only on the ordinary physical senses. Not dismissed, but also not the first hypothesis and not the only one available. There's a second layer I haven't named yet, and it might matter more than the first, what that specific text may have accumulated across 18 centuries of readers concentrating on the very same image, reading the very same chapter, searching for the very same thing. I call this energetic reading as a hypothesis, never as a closed conclusion. Perhaps some region of my own field was activated that night, but similar sensations also arise from simple concentration or ordinary tension during close, attentive reading, no further explanation needed. I consider, without concluding anything, a multidimensional hypothesis, an overlap between the holopensene accumulated in that symbol across centuries of readers and my own field on that particular night. In the memory I have, there was no intense emotional reaction. The experience felt quiet, almost too discreet for what it came to represent afterward. I also can't classify it as pure intuition because there was an image and a bodily sensation tied together, and pure intuition rarely arrives with that double signature. I consider outside influence, the holopensene of the text itself, a valid hypothesis without leaning on it as absolute certainty. The phrase I use for the whole method is this, and it applies to any similar experience you might have. Perceive first, examine after. The problem is never feeling something, it's reacting before doing either one properly. This is the point where I use that authorial phrase again, the mat drift. I need to repeat, it isn't a term from the Egyptian texts. It's the name I give to the moment when fear, intuition, and possible outside influences arrive tangled together, and a person weighs all of them as if they were the same signal, the same weight. The principle is exactly what we just walked through here. Perceive first, separate the hypotheses after, never in the reverse order. Earlier in this video, I asked if you'd ever come close enough to your own Krater to feel the difference. It's time to answer that in practice now, with the body, not just in your head thinking about it. I call this practice the open vessel. This isn't in any ancient text. I need to be clear about that up front. It's a practice I developed myself, inspired by the Krater in the 4th book of the Corpus Hermeticum, but not lifted from it word for word. First, sit in silence, breathe slowly 3 times, and deliberately visualize a vessel of light at chest height. This is visualization you're choosing on purpose, not something that spontaneously appeared. Second, ask internally, am I willing to look inside and notice, without hurrying, how your own body responds to that question? Third, tilt your attention into the vessel for 60 to 90 seconds, without forcing any image, without forcing any particular response. Fourth, write down whatever came, treating it first as mental content because you began the exercise by visualizing on purpose. Only repetition and context across several sessions would allow you to consider another origin for what appeared. And nothing appeared is also a perfectly valid answer, not a failure. One warning matters more than everything else here. Contraction in the body doesn't automatically mean no. Expansion doesn't automatically mean yes. The body hands you raw data. That data still needs to be interpreted by you calmly, without rushing to close a conclusion. If you do this practice today, comment "I dove in" below. It doesn't matter if an image showed up, some sensation, or absolutely nothing. That word means only one thing, that you actually ran the experiment. The mechanism that actually matters here isn't deciding whether that image was clairvoyance or simple imagination. For a long time, I thought that was the central question of this whole investigation. It isn't. The operational truth is this, and it's simpler than it sounds. There's a question that comes before any classification of the phenomenon. Can I observe the experience without dismissing it out of fear and without turning it into certainty just because I want it to be true? That's the entire criterion. It isn't a closed answer about what happened to me on that specific night. It's a criterion you can apply to your own life every time you feel something you can't quite name. Or did you already decide it was proof before examining it at all? Both are the same rush, just pointed in opposite directions, and both cost you something. Discernment isn't luck, and it isn't some rare gift reserved for a chosen few. It's the simple habit of holding the question a little longer than the discomfort asks you to let go. I think of it almost like a muscle, not a talent. No one is born discerning well, at most born with a bit more natural patience for uncertainty. Everything else gets trained, one exercise at a time, the same way you train anything that demands repetition without any glamour at all. Now you understand why I said at the very beginning that you are the only living human being capable of unlocking this gift. Did you dismiss it out of fear before examining it calmly? Not because you were chosen among billions of people like some cosmic lottery, but because no other person anywhere in the world can step into your consciousness, watch your own resistance from the inside, and make that dive for you. A cup can be offered to everyone without exception. Your dive, though, stays entirely your own, non-transferable. What this video created isn't a conclusion for you to store away and forget. It's a criterion, ready to use. It will live exactly where it's needed. The next time some sensation shows up without a clear explanation, you'll have to choose right there in the moment. Dismiss it too fast or believe it too fast. That's yours now. No one else carries that responsibility for you. There's a question I haven't opened here on purpose. The Corpus Hermeticum says the Logos, the word, was distributed among everyone equally, without exception. Only the Nous was sent apart, inside the cup, waiting for a choice. What does it mean to carry the word without ever having dived into the cup? That's exactly what the next video is going to examine. The Logos without Nous in modern life. What happens when we speak, argue, and convince others without ever having made that dive ourselves? Before you go, one last thing. So, here's what we covered today. One of the blockages I run into most in practice isn't a total absence of perception. It's the difficulty of telling apart internal signals that arrive tangled together all at once. I call this the Mott drift, the moment when fear, real intuition, and possible influences from the environment feel like a single, indistinguishable signal. I spent months turning this whole investigation into something you can actually apply in your life, structured step by step, the way the ancient scribes recorded truth to last. The result is the Mott Drift Trilogy, 3 complete guides built to work together. The first shows exactly how the drift operates inside your own everyday reactions. The second gives you a 20-minute method to investigate real differences between fear, intuition, and possible environmental or energetic influences. And the third teaches you how to recover balance and reduce emotional assimilation after environments and interactions that have worn you down. All 3 guides arrive together right away as soon as you secure your access. If any of this resonated with you, use that reaction as an initial data point, not proof of anything yet. The link is in the description, waiting for you.